We have made it to the trade deadline here in season number 1 of the Golden State Warriors, MyNBA franchise here on NBA 2K25. And today, we've got an opportunity to really push this team over the edge, try to make them a contender, and go for possibly one last title run with Steph Curry on the roster. We went through all of the possible scenarios for us in the last episode, from potentially rebuilding, whether that's trading away Curry or selling off other older veterans for assets. We also talked about the idea of buying, which, given how our team has performed this year, could certainly make sense. 28-21, currently the 5 seed in the Western Conference. We explored the idea of going after a second true star, if you will. And we also explored the idea of adding really good role players to build around not just Stephen Curry, but also Jonathan Kuminga as well, given how well he has played throughout this season. Along with our team's trade deadline, we're going to go through the rest of the NBA as well. There's going to be a lot of movement across the league this year, which should be a lot of fun. But I don't know if there's any team under more pressure to perform this year at the deadline than the Warriors. And the whole reason why I picked this team to begin with is the amount of roster flexibility and the opportunity to potentially look to rebuild or make a splash and contend in Curry's final seasons before he eventually retires at some point. So we've got some interesting decisions to make and how we're going to want to go about doing it. Given that we're 28-21 and very clearly holding a playoff spot in the Western Conference, I think it would be in our best interest to look to buy, whether that is going after another true star or going after some high-level role players. And we've got some guys who can be used as matching salaries, including Draymond Green, who's obviously struggled this year, along with Andrew Wiggins. It's no secret that this team lacks young talent and doesn't have a whole lot of draft picks other than our own. But I think we might have enough assets to potentially make something work, whether we do choose to make a splash this year at the deadline, or if we add some really good players around Steph and Kuminga. So I'll briefly start by going over why we're not going to rebuild. And again, our team has had a really good season. We're probably going to get a playoff spot, and we look like we can hang with the best teams in the Western Conference. I couldn't find a realistic Stephen Curry trade that would make sense for both sides. I don't think it's going to happen, at least this season. From there, we looked at potentially acquiring another star. Options include Julius Randle with the Knicks, Jimmy Butler with the Miami Heat, Zion Williamson with the New Orleans Pelicans. Those were the big 3, I would say, in terms of realistic options that are going to be attainable without having to trade away Steph Curry. Likely, if we want one of those guys, we would have to use Jonathan Kuminga in the deal, which is going to be a tough decision, and we'll go over that in a little bit. We also explored the idea of getting either LeBron James or Kawhi Leonard, but both of their teams seemed very unwilling to make a move with us. In terms of adding a really good role player, the 2 guys who popped out to me the most were Jarrett Allen and Miles Turner. I think we can all agree that this team would be a lot better with a true 5, somebody who can protect the rim, rebound, run the floor, and in the case of Miles Turner, can really shoot it. Now, these 2 guys are going to cost a lot, given that they're really good players on teams in the Eastern Conference fighting for playoff spots. So it's not going to be easy to make a deal work with them, and they're not going to be much cheaper than some of those star-level players that we were looking at earlier. So that brings us to the Jonathan Kuminga dilemma. He's played really well this year. He has been on a tear over the last month or so, and it's put us in an interesting predicament because we have to figure out if we want to use him as a trade asset or if we want to keep him long term. Since the start of January, he has been on another level scoring-wise. He's averaging 25 through January, and through the first game of February, he's averaging 28 and 11. The highs with Kuminga this year have been really high. He scored 50 very recently against the Phoenix Suns. He's had a lot of 30-plus point games. The shot-making upside, we haven't really seen it at a super high level in the first 3 seasons with him, but it has been on full display. But we have to keep in mind, he's on the final year of his contract. He's going to be a restricted free agent, and his price has gone way up this year. Somebody's going to offer him a max, whether it's us or another team. Is he a max player? And if we don't think that's the case, then maybe it would make sense to use him as a trade asset now for somebody like Randle or Butler or Zion. Let's take a look at some other possibilities as well in terms of trades. So this is a deal that I got offered in the last episode. It's Caleb Martin and a first-round pick for Buddy Hield. And I think it's an interesting idea because it would give us another draft pick, but we would be downgrading. Caleb Martin has not had a particularly good season, and I think Buddy Hield is an important cog for our roster. He provides us obviously great spacing. He's averaging around 12 a game this year, 40% from three. He's got 2.5 years left on his deal, so he's going to be able to stick around if we want to hold on to him. But I do like the idea of getting Caleb Martin and a first-round pick. I am curious, though, if we can potentially do it without trading Buddy Hield, or if we can get more for Buddy Hield. So I figured I would put him in the trade finder. There were some interesting offers. Clint Capella would certainly fit a need for this team. Now, I do like Trayce Jackson-Davis, and I have been impressed with him over the last month or so. If we go after a big, I'd rather someone a little bit better, a little bit quicker on their feet, but Capella could work. Other interesting names here included Miles McBride, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope I don't think would make much sense for Orlando. Peyton Watson, Yves Missi. Again, we want to be realistic. I don't think the Pelicans are trading away Missi for a 32-year-old Buddy Hield. There are some first-round picks in here, though, which I like. Adding more draft picks is not a bad idea. Just because I want to buy at this deadline doesn't necessarily mean we need to mortgage our future. Leonard Miller is a prospect who I was a big fan of a few years ago. I was surprised he fell into the second round. I think he could be an intriguing prospect to try to build through the G League or the back end of the rotation. But I didn't find any deal in there that was super tempting or super realistic. So I went back to the Sixers to see what I could get for the 2029 pick. I don't really think it's going to work. I'd still rather do this Caleb Martin first-round pick deal without Buddy Hield, though. Maybe DeAnthony Melton could work like Buddy Hield. Melton was with the Sixers last year. I think Daryl Morey would be happy to take either one of those two guys back. It wouldn't hurt to take a look at some other offers as well for Melton. We could get a first-rounder from Memphis, but we'd have to give up our own pick this year. We can get that selection from the Lakers. I don't know how willing they would be to trading a future pick. And we can also get a selection from the Wizards in a few years from now as well. Let's go back to the Lakers, though. They were very willing to offer a future first-round pick and Gabe Vincent. Vincent has not been a good signing for them really whatsoever. Common theme here with Gabe Vincent and Caleb Martin. When role players developed by the Heat leave the Heat, their careers seem to go downhill. Another guy I want to look at potentially moving is Kevon Looney. He's been here for a decade. On 3 of the 4 title teams, he was a huge piece of the 2022 squad, but he's on the final year of his contract. Trayce Jackson-Davis has taken over the starting center spot, and if Trayce Jackson-Davis is going to be one of our bigs, I'd rather the other big have some more size and more athleticism. Now, we can't trade Looney because he's injured, but teams trade injured players all the time. So I'm going to take his injury off and then put it back on after we make a deal. And if we do this Sixers trade, I wouldn't mind trying to get Adem Bona, second rounder from UCLA who struggled to crack the rotation. But if we do the trade with the first round pick in Caleb Martin, I wouldn't mind adding Adem Bona as well because I think he's a guy we can potentially build around as an intriguing option as a depth big man. If we had Bona in the deal, we probably would have to trade away Buddy Hield. So I put Martin and Bona in the trade finder, and yeah, these offers don't seem promising. I don't think we're trading Jonathan Kuminga for a deal where the best player is Caleb Martin. But then I come to this trade. Moses Moody would be the centerpiece here, and we would also be getting Ricky Council IV in this trade as well, an intriguing undrafted player out of Arkansas a couple years ago who's played well with the Sixers in limited opportunities. So that might be worth it. But why are they so willing to trade away Caleb Martin? He has not been a positive for them this year. Estimated wins added at around -2. They signed him to a 4-year deal in the offseason, and he has not been worth that contract at all. They clearly view him as a negative asset. They're trying to get off of that contract, and they may be willing to give up a lot in order to get it done. I think they'd like to bring a guy like DeAnthony Melton back, so I tried the idea of a 3-team deal here with Detroit, but apparently the Pistons view Jalen Noel as some kind of good asset. I don't know what they're thinking, but I guess that's not going to happen. I explored the idea of Buddy Hield being the centerpiece, but I really wasn't willing to give up much more. So I want to go back to the deal with Moses Moody. And if we add Lindy Waters in here, they'd be willing to give up the first-round pick as well. So would it be worth it to trade away a guy like Moses Moody, who I do like? I think he's got good upside, only 22 years old. But he hasn't really taken major steps in his development. Career low in terms of true shooting percentage this year. Estimated wins added of 0. I like his skill set. He's 6'5". He plays bigger than his size. He can shoot the 3 ball. He can guard multiple positions. He's a solid athlete. And he's a guy I would have liked to re-sign depending on his contract demands. He seems interested in coming back, but for $15 million. I don't think Moses Moody's worth $15 million. So with that being the case, this deal all of a sudden now looks like a no-brainer. Lindy Waters and Guy Santos have not been regular rotation players for us. Waters is a good three-point shooter. Santos is an intriguing 22-year-old prospect. But I feel like this is a really good deal for us. And looking at it from the perspective of the Sixers, I think it can be a good deal for them as well. They're getting out of the Caleb Martin contract. That deal has been a disaster for them. He has been horrible for the Sixers this year. And yeah, it sucks to trade away young players like Adem Bona, Ricky Council, and this first-round pick. But Moses Moody screams Daryl Morey to me. I think he sees some PJ Tucker with Moody as an undersized 3 who can guard the 2 through the 4 and shoot the 3 ball. Clearly the Sixers like Moses Moody a lot. I think they're going to try to extend him in the offseason. And because of that, we've got a deal. Our first trade in the series is done. Moses Moody, Lindy Waters, and Guy Santos are headed to the Sixers for Caleb Martin, Adem Bona, Ricky Council, and a future first-round pick. We're going to hope to get Martin back to his form from the Miami Heat, where he was a key cog for their finals teams. Adem Bona, a prospect I really liked out of UCLA, struggled to find the floor for the Sixers, but I think he can get some run with us. And then we haven't even talked about Ricky Council, undrafted kid out of Arkansas, played well for the Sixers last year, but hasn't been able to crack the rotation this year. He's under contract for a few years, so we'll have an opportunity to build around him. All 3 of these guys are under contract for a while, and the 3 guys we traded away to the Sixers are on expiring deals. I think that's another reason why Philadelphia liked the trade. It gives them more financial flexibility. I imagine they're going to look to extend Moses Moody, but it gives them more room to sign other role players who they hope will be more productive than Caleb Martin has. And now we had an extra first-round pick. It's in 5 years from now, and the Sixers, trying to win a title now with Embiid, Maxey, and Paul George, are not worried about 5 years in the future, but that could be a really valuable asset. I think it's pretty likely at least one of the Sixers or Clippers will be bad in 2029, and we only need one of those teams to be bad to end up with a good pick. While I really like that first deal for us, and I think it makes us better in the short term and the long term, it's not going to move the needle if we're trying to win a title with Steph Curry. I think we need to take a swing. So I went back and looked at some of these offers. Julius Randle seems very attainable, but the Knicks just signed him to an extension. So I don't think that's going to work. Jimmy Butler, in order to get him, we would have to trade away Jonathan Kuminga, which is something I would be very hesitant on doing, considering Jimmy Butler is a 35-year-old pending free agent. Zion Williamson. I think maybe it would be worth it to trade away Jonathan Kuminga, but the Pelicans are the 5 seed. I think they want to see where they can go with this core over the next couple of years. I don't think it makes sense for them to trade Zion Williamson right now. And then, as I mentioned, with LeBron and Kawhi, these 2 teams seem very unwilling to trade these guys. I don't know what the holdup is for the Clippers. They've been bad. Kawhi's value is at its highest. I feel like they should, but it doesn't seem like they're interested. Jarrett Allen and Miles Turner. There's no offers for either of them either. Even though Miles Turner is a free agent this year and Jarrett Allen is next year, it doesn't seem like those teams are going to be willing to trade those guys away. Maybe we need to set our sights a little bit shorter. We'll start with Karl Anthony Towns. I don't know how willing Minnesota would be to do this, but it's an interesting idea given that they could be looking to add some more long-term financial flexibility. Now, the problem is the only matching salaries would be either Andrew Wiggins, who probably does not want to go back to Minnesota, or Draymond Green. And I think we all know why that's not going to work. I think maybe we can make the value work with the Wolves, but I think it'd be too complicated. What about Brandon Ingram in New Orleans? I don't think that would work either because they just signed him to an extension as well. Kyle Kuzma with the Wizards could work. Not an ideal second option, but he's a good player. Might have to give up Jonathan Kuminga, though. Definitely not worth it for Kyle Kuzma. Colin Sexton, I feel like, has become one of the more underrated players since being traded away to the Utah Jazz, and I could see them wanting to sell high on his value. It seems like they'd be potentially willing to give him away for the right price, so that could be an option. But if we have him and Curry in the backcourt, there's not going to be much defense, which is why I think Jalen Suggs could be an interesting choice. He's really broken out this year, similar to Kuminga, but I don't know if the Magic are going to want to offer him a max contract. Mark Williams would be a good fit. Hasn't been able to stay on the floor, which is why the Hornets might be willing to deal him away. Of the deals we just explored, I want to go back to Karl Anthony Towns. Unfortunately, we don't have somebody who can match the salaries because I don't think Andrew Wiggins or Draymond Green would be very keen on going to Minnesota. But I think maybe we can make this work with a 3-team deal. Even though the Timberwolves have been one of the best teams in the Western Conference, I could see them doing this. I mean, they just did it in real life a few days ago. So I think the idea of trading away Karl Anthony Towns to add some financial flexibility makes sense for them, and he'd be an awesome fit with us. You pair the best shooter in NBA history with, in my opinion, the best big man shooter in NBA history. Now, sure, it is a long financial commitment, but Karl Anthony Towns is under 30 years old. He's still a really good player, and I think him and Curry could maybe be a championship duo if all goes well. Now, again, the problem is we're going to have to trade a matching salary, and we may have to trade Jonathan Kuminga. I'd rather not do that. And in this deal, we would really only have to trade away Draymond Green. But again, as we know, that's not going to work. He cannot be teammates with Rudy Gobert. So I want to try the infrastructure of the Draymond deal, but with Andrew Wiggins instead. I'd certainly be willing to give up a couple picks because I think it'd be worth it for a guy like Karl Anthony Towns, but they're a little bit hesitant. I might have to trade Buddy Hield. It's not something I'd want to do, but given how good of a shooter Karl Anthony Towns is, we would still have plenty of spacing on this roster, so Buddy Hield becomes a little bit more expendable. Wiggins, Hield, Looney. I think that could be the 3. Now, again, we're obviously going to have to give up some draft picks and whatnot. So I think the idea I have for a 3-team deal is Andrew Wiggins going to the Nets for Cam Johnson. I put Wiggins in the trade finder. The Nets seems like they'd be willing to do this straight up. And I think Minnesota would like the idea of adding Cam Johnson. He can replace some of the spacing that Karl Anthony Towns brings to the table. And for the Nets, they trade a bad 3-year deal for a bad 2-year deal. So they get some extra flexibility financially sooner rather than later. This Minnesota team has plenty of spacers shooting the ball, and if you add Cameron Johnson and Buddy Hield, they're not going to miss Karl Anthony Towns' 3-point shooting that much. The Nets are willing to do it, but obviously Minnesota is still not. So we're going to have to give up some draft picks in order to make this work. The pick I'd be most willing to give away is our own 2029 first-rounder. We're not positioned to be good in 2029, but I think the Clippers and Sixers pick is still a better asset. I'd be willing to trade the 2027 pick as well. I don't love trading 2 1s, but it might be worth it to add a guy like Karl Anthony Towns to this team. I really thought about this trade, and I think it would make sense for all parties. But before I decided to offer it, we got some breaking news around the rest of the NBA. A superstar level player has asked out and requested a trade. A Shams bomb. Jimmy Butler has privately expressed his dissatisfaction with the organization and has requested a trade to Pat Riley, per sources. And this seems like a surprise because the Miami Heat are contending. They're having a really good season, but it seems like they haven't been able to work out contract details. And apparently, Jimmy Butler really likes the idea of coming here to Golden State. He thinks he has a better opportunity to win a title with the Warriors this year as opposed to Miami. Steph Curry is reportedly enamored with the idea of playing with Jimmy Butler, and the fact that this once private trade request has come public, that means the Heat have lost all leverage, and it's going to be harder for them to get value for him. Again, keep in mind, he's 35 years old. He is a player option this year, but he is still a damn good player who's had a great season for Miami, averaging 26-5 on great shooting splits for a Heat team who is currently, I believe, in 4th in a competitive Eastern Conference. Jonathan Kuminga would likely have to be the backbone of this trade. Are we willing to do that? Given that Jimmy Butler is 35 years old and not under contract technically for next year, I would be opposed to trading away Jonathan Kuminga. I'd rather do without. We do have the opportunity to do this deal. I'd rather not trade our first-round pick this year and Draymond Green. So we're going to have to take him out. We might have to trade away Buddy Hield. It's unfortunate, but I think it would be worth it. Wiggins, Payton, Looney, and Hield would be the 4 players going to Miami. We'd probably have to trade some draft picks as well. We're losing all of our depth here, but we just got some new depth from the Sixers with Martin, Bona, and Council. So I think we would survive losing all these players. I think Miami is still going to gun for a title this year. They're going to want some win-now players, but obviously this is not going to be anywhere close to enough to making the deal work. I'd be willing to give up some draft picks. I get that he's 35. I get that he's a free agent, but it's worth it for a guy like Jimmy Butler, who is still at the top of his game and a proven playoff performer. So I offered our 2029 first-round pick, and ultimately the Miami Heat ended up saying no, as I kind of expected. I added a second-round pick. I figured maybe that would possibly move the needle. No. So we're probably going to have to throw a third team in here to make this work. I switched out Buddy Hield, though, for D'Anthony Melton. Maybe the Heat would rather the expiring contract as opposed to 2.5 seasons of Buddy Hield. They had the same star value, so I figured they're probably not going to say yes, and that ended up being correct. I switched out Thomas Bryant for Haywood Highsmith. Highsmith is a little bit better, but he also has another year under contract. Again, I figured maybe they'd rather the financial flexibility of a few extra $1 million. I also added a second rounder in 2029, and they still said no. I think the only way to make this work would be by trading away Jonathan Kuminga, so I decided to get creative. Who on a third team can take the place of Jonathan Kuminga? And I look at the Orlando Magic, who have had a disappointing season. They're not even in the play-in tournament currently. Franz Wagner's on a big deal. Paolo Banchero will be soon as well. And I don't know if they're going to be willing to give Jalen Suggs the big bucks. Suggs could be exactly what Miami's looking for in the backcourt. I think he'd be a great complement for Tyler Hero. He's had an awesome season, 17.5 points per game, 60% true shooting percentage, great perimeter defense. He was a guy we looked at earlier in the episode as well, but obviously we couldn't really come to anything with Orlando. So I think I have come up with the 3-team deal that's going to make this work. We're giving up the same amount of pieces on our side, and we're getting pretty much the same stuff back. But obviously there's a whole new element with Orlando and Jalen Suggs. The Magic will be getting back Jaime Jaquez, and you might be wondering why the Heat are trying to trade him away. He has had a very disappointing season. He has noticeably regressed from his sophomore season to now, whereas Nikola Jovic, who's a little bit lower rated, has outplayed Jaime Jaquez. He's shot the ball more efficiently, and for a Miami Heat team who still wants to make a run at the Eastern Conference playoffs, they would rather the efficiency and defense that Jovic brings to the table. So Wiggins, Payton, Looney, Jalen Suggs, Caleb Houston, and a second rounder are going to Miami. The Magic are getting Jaime Jaquez, D'Anthony Melton, our 2029 first, and 2 second rounders, while we will be getting Jimmy Butler, along with Haywood Highsmith, Pele Larson, and Corey Joseph, the former Warrior, and both teams would say yes. We've got a deal, a bomb. This series has been flipped upside down. Jimmy Butler is a Golden State Warrior. So let's look at this through the perspective of all 3 teams. Miami's trading away Butler and Jaime Jaquez, but it's clear that Jimmy Butler was not going to come back to this team. They've got a really good backcourt that they like with Suggs and Hero, along with Bam Adebayo, and they've added a lot of depth pieces with Wiggins, Looney, and Gary Payton, all of whom have won championships as role players in the past. As for Orlando, they felt comfortable trading away Suggs because they're all in on Anthony Black being the point guard of the future, and they get a developmental forward in Jaime Jaquez who they can look to build around. And of course, looking at this trade through our perspective, we got a second star with Jimmy Butler. We didn't have to trade away Jonathan Kuminga. We didn't have to trade away Brandon Podziemski, and we only had to part with 1 first-round pick. Now again, Jimmy Butler's not under contract next year. He has a player option. He's widely expected to decline it. He will hit the open market, and there's a chance we traded away all of that for nothing. And it doesn't help that he's 35 years old and not getting any better. But if we do re-sign him, then we've got ourselves a great core with Curry, Butler, and Kuminga. I think this is going to be the starting lineup for the rest of the year with Buddy Hield and Trayce Jackson-Davis. We do not go out and acquire another big. I have full faith in Trayce Jackson-Davis as the full-time center. He's played really well in extra reps throughout the month of January. He's ready for this opportunity. The bench looks very different. We traded away basically half the roster and pretty much all of our depth. I was hoping to get Haywood Highsmith in the rotation, but his shooting splits are abysmal. It'll be a lot easier when Podziemski and Anderson are back healthy. For now, we need Jared Butler to be the backup point guard because there isn't really anybody other than Steph who can run the point. I'm hoping to get Podziemski healthy sooner than later, and he'll be able to run the second team offense and potentially close games with the starters as well. So those are going to be the two trades we make here at the deadline. Certainly a bombshell. We flipped the roster on its head, and while our team has had a good season and we now have basically an entirely new squad, I feel like we're going to be better equipped for the playoffs. I think we added more young talent, and our arsenal of draft picks is more valuable than it was, say, 15 minutes ago. So I think we made out very well this trade deadline, getting ourselves better for the long term, and obviously the short term as well. With that, we'll take a look at the trade deadline across the rest of the NBA, going over some other notable moves. So the Utah Jazz, who have been one of the worst teams in the Western Conference, they're going to be selling. Colin Sexton is headed back to Cleveland along with Steve Mikhailuk. They'll be getting Karis LeVert, Jalen Tyson, the former first rounder, and 4 seconds. And that's not the only move the Jazz are going to make. They also traded away Walker Kessler to New Orleans for Jeremiah Robinson-Earl and a future first-round pick. This gives the Pelicans an actual rim-protecting center, and the Jazz add another pick to their arsenal. So they add a first-rounder from New Orleans. They add 4 second-rounders from Cleveland. Danny Ainge continues to add to his stockpile of picks. Zach LaVine is on the move to the Spurs. Last year in the Blazers series, LaVine ended up in San Antonio, and he does again here. I think it makes a lot of sense adding another scorer and shot creator to that Spurs lineup. Talen Horton-Tucker is also headed to San Antonio. In return, Chicago will be getting salary fillers. Keldon Johnson and Zach Collins both should be able to get minutes on this team. They're also getting a future first-round pick along with A.J. Green. Not a bad haul for LaVine, who seemingly had negative trade value a year ago. All right, big one here. Probably the second biggest deal at the deadline other than Jimmy Butler. Jalen Green is going to Toronto. So the rationale behind this one for the Rockets is that they were hoping this is the year they're going to climb up in the Western Conference standings, be a playoff team, and it has not happened. With year 4 for Green and Şengün, year 3 for Jabari Smith, another year of development for Whitmore and Thompson, and of course the addition of Reed Shepherd. They feel the need to make a big move, and they feel like Jalen Green is the odd man out. Now, Green has had the best season of his NBA career, 20 points per game on solid efficiency, which has been a concern for him over the first few years, but it looks like they don't want to sign him to a long-term deal, and he's made himself some money this year with his strong play. They're prioritizing paying Alperen Şengün, and they want to continue to stockpile assets because they're a team who likely will be in the market to trade for a star in the future. They'll be getting back Grady Dick, who's had a great season, Bruce Brown, a future first, and 2 second-rounders. I love this deal in the perspective of Toronto. The Raptors very quietly are the 3 seed in the Eastern Conference, and now they have a core 4 of Scotty Barnes, Jalen Green, Emmanuel Quickley, and RJ Barrett. That is a great group to go into the future with, especially with the duo of Green and Barnes. And if those guys can hit their ceilings, look out. This team could be filthy good in a very short amount of time. I'm sure they don't love the idea of trading away Grady Dick and a first rounder, but to get Jalen Green, it might be worth it. I think the Blazers could use some more guard depth, and the Spurs could use some more size after trading away Zach Collins, so this deal feels like it makes a lot of sense. Trey Jones to Portland for Robert Williams. The Spurs add another rim protector. We'll see if they can play him alongside Wembanyama. I think it can work, given how versatile Wembanyama is on the defensive end of the floor. The Spurs already have a logjam of guards, though, and obviously they got Zach LaVine earlier. So they'll be sending Jones to Portland, a team who needs a backup point guard behind Scoot Henderson. Another smaller deal, Malik Beasley to the Mavericks for Najee Marshall. I think Dallas could use some more spacing off the bench. Najee Marshall was a guy I thought the Pistons would look at signing in the offseason. Now they get him here at the deadline. The Blazers are not done. Part of the reason why they wanted Trey Jones is because they're moving Anthony Simons to the Rockets for Dylan Brooks and a heavily protected Pistons first-round pick. With trading away Jalen Green, the Rockets are hoping for somebody who can play a similar role. Simons isn't as good as Jalen Green, but if you can get 75% of Jalen Green's production, you'll take it for a guy in Dylan Brooks who's been kind of a liability this year. And the first-round pick, which is surprisingly less valuable than you might think it would be, given that it's coming from the Detroit Pistons. So normally this is where we would play our game, Jimmy Butler's Warriors debut after the trade deadline against the Utah Jazz. And I was planning on playing this game in today's episode, but unfortunately the PlayStation servers went down, and I couldn't upload my footage from after this game onwards. I think it's an issue for everybody worldwide, so hopefully PlayStation gets their stuff together, or else that would be a problem. So I think we're going to save that for the next episode. Again, I wanted to include it here. It ended up being a really fun game, as you guys are going to see, but we will save Jimmy Butler's Warriors debut for next time around. Hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you thought of the moves down below in the comment section, specifically the Jimmy Butler trade. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you are new. Peace out.